Hi, everybody. Happy Sunday. This is our 14th Sunday devotional since the start of quarantine. And today we decided to do something a little bit different. And we're just going to be sharing some of our favorite stories from the scriptures and in particular from the Bible. In particular, we have one story from the Old Testament, one story from the New Testament. And so I'm excited to see how this turns out. And it'll be a little more casual than what we maybe have done in the past, but it's number 14. What are you going to do?
Yep. Wow, it's number 14. Good golly.
Yes.
That's crazy.
And so I'm Rachel. Chris is here. Thank you so much for coming on doing this with me this week. This has been a really hard week. So I'm really glad that I get to talk to you today.
Yeah. No, it's always fun to dive into the scripture, find our favorite parts. Like that was kind of cool this week to figure out, okay, what is one of my favorite stories? And so the one that I have kind of just surfaced. It's like, yeah, this is perfect.
Yeah. There's those ones that just really ring true to you, to like that mean a special amount, maybe because they helped you in a different part of your life, or they just have always really ring true. And I'm a story person, and so particular like a story more than like the poetry kind of sections. All those can be good, but I really love the stories.
Yeah, no, me too. That's what I learned best from stories. You know, like Chronicles of Narnia is a book series that has always stood out to me, just because it's C.S. Lewis taking his faith and putting it in this story form, and so it's just, yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear your favorites. And if you're listening, we'd love to hear your favorites in the comments section. So let us know what inspires you, and we'd love to talk about that. And if you like this, then maybe we'll keep doing it, because there's plenty of favorites. There's no end to my favorites.
There is no end.
So my first choice, we're going to do our Old Testament first, and then we'll do our New Testament. But my first choice is in 2 Kings 6. And in this chapter, Elisha the prophet is instructing the king of how to fight in a war with Syria. And they are completely outmatched. And he looks over, the king looks over, he sees the Syrian army, and they have just a mass of soldiers and chariots and everything. And he despairs. He's sore troubled for this thing, and he's very upset. And he answered, "Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them." And Elisha prayed and said, "Lord, I pray thee, open his eyes, that he may see." And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. And when they came down to him, Elisha prayed unto the Lord and said, "Smite the people, I pray thee, with blindness." And he smote them with blindness according to the word of Elisha. And so I just love that idea that they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And looking, when you have the struggles of life and you feel lonely and you feel like you're struggling, and to remember that they that be with you, that the angels bearing you up, the spirit that's with you, that all the things that they that be with you are more than they that be with them. Because sometimes the adversary can seem insurmountable, and it's something I've often thought of. And I know definitely, especially on my mission, that is a scripture I would often, they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And it's something I really, really love. I don't know if you ever had any thoughts about that story.
Oh, I love that story, because sometimes when I read that story, it also makes me think of the verse that says, "Greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world." And sometimes, like, it's so hard to see that.
Yeah.
Because like you don't see all who's actually with you, but sometimes you just feel alone, and it feels like the struggle you're going through is so great. And that's the awesome thing about this story. And you know me, I look at these and I go, yeah, these are true stories. This stuff happened. Elisha did pray. And this servant did see all of a sudden that veil
Right.
was lifted and there was more with them. And so when I look at that, I go, yeah, I'm not alone. So whatever I'm going through, greater is he who is in me than he who is in the world. I may not be able to see it, but then I have a story like this that shows me the truth.
Yeah.
There are more with me than there are against me.
And especially when you think of that, the people that your loved ones that have passed on are
Yeah.
also there with us, helping us, and I believe that 100%, and that they're, I think, more actively involved in our lives than we even maybe realize.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There are so many things that we just don't understand and
Mm-hmm.
that we don't see. And so I think that's where we got to rely and trust. And that's where a story like that reminds us that there
Yeah.
is more than meets the eye.
Yes. Very good. Yeah, I agree. They that be with us are more than they that be with them, and also that the adversary is not as overwhelming as we think. Like
Yeah.
he has a big bark, but not as big a bite.
Yeah. I think sometimes we think that the enemy is kind of like, you know, I guess God's equal, just God's
Mm-hmm.
arch nemesis and an equal to God.
All
But that's
right.
not the case.
All
Satan
right.
is no equal to God. He trying to fight God would be the equivalent of a dead flea trying to come against a full-grown bull elephant. Like that doesn't work. Like there is
Right.
no match there. And so to remember that
Yeah.
while we are in this world, our enemy, number one, is already defeated. Number two, therefore can never defeat God. And three, is no equal to God. So truly, greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. All right. What is your Old Testament story that you wanted to share?
Yes. Well, it's funny because both my stories are Old Testament, but this first Old Testament story is Elisha's mentor, Elijah.
All
And it's
right.
probably one of my favorite Old Testament stories. And to me, I picked these two stories because one is a story of great faith, and one is a story of great fear, great disappointment. So this is the great faith story. So here we have Elijah. And so here he is in the northern kingdom in Israel, and the king is married to the wicked Jezebel, and she seduced the king, and the whole nation is seduced, and they're following Baal and Asherah. And so the first miracle that occurs here is Elijah says, it will not rain for 3.5 years. It will not rain until I say it's going to rain. And it's funny because this wasn't a plague for the sake of a plague. This was actually done because they believed that Baal controlled the weather. So I think this is the first indicator to what the theme of this story is. As much as this story has a lot of miracles in it and a lot of supernatural things that happen, the real miracle is the close relationship with God. So this is about the people of Israel and showing them who the real God is so that they could come back to him and have that close relationship with him. And so now here we are about 3 years or so into this famine, into this drought. And Elijah goes to the king and he says, now summon all Israel to join me at Mount Carmel, along with the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah, who are supported by Jezebel. And then it skips a few verses, and Elijah stood in front of them, the people of Israel, and he said this, how much longer will you waver? And I love how the New Living Translation says this, hobbling between two opinions. If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him. But the people were completely silent. And so the people were wavering and they were double-minded. So here's Elijah being like, no, we're going to get single-minded here and you're going to see who God is. And what's funny, this scene is actually kind of comical because the prophets of Baal start calling on Baal. They set up these altars, they have their sacrifices, and as the prophets of Baal are calling on Baal, begging Baal to send fire down, because the God who sends fire, that's the real God, and nothing happens. the prophets of Baal go all day, and Elijah starts taunting them. Well, maybe he's in the bathroom, or maybe he's sleeping, or maybe you should shout just a little bit louder. And so they keep on calling on Baal. They're cutting themselves, like nasty stuff. They're calling upon him, and nothing happens. And then I love this story here of great faith, where not only does Elijah rebuild this altar of the Lord that was torn down, he gets the people to douse it with water. Like water, not just once, but 3 times. And there's this trench that he dug around it. The trench gets filled with water. And so it's like making this as hard as possible. But this is how confident Elijah was that God not only would act, but that God told him to do this, that God told him to do this showdown, which I think is the most important part. He wasn't just doing this willy-nilly. This was an act of obedience. This was an act of faithful obedience to God. And so it says this, at the usual time for offering the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet walked up to the altar and prayed, O Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. Prove that I have done all this at your command. O Lord, answer me. Answer me so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have brought them back to yourself. And immediately the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven, burned up the young bull, the wood, the stones, and the dust. It even licked up all the water in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell face down on the ground and cried out, the Lord, he is God. Yes, the Lord, he is God. So just as the plague wasn't just for plague's sake, this miracle wasn't just to show them something supernatural. It was to bring them to the greatest miracle of all, that relationship with God. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that story when you hear the story of Elijah?
Yeah, that's a really fun story. That's 1 Kings 18. And I like the fact that it not only ate up the sacrifice of Elijah, but also of the other priests. Like it took up the whole thing. And yeah, it's a very showy moment, but also not for Elijah's benefit. Like it's not for like the others were trying to put on a show for their own aggrandizement, for their own, and he was trying to do it for the people, to try to get the people to understand. And so I think that's the main difference there between the two, the why one prayer was answered and the other wasn't, is that is the intent of the prophet, that he was looking to get the people to believe. And you think how hard that must have been for Elijah to wait those 3.5 years, because it's not like that was a pleasant experience for him to be in that famine and to wait and wait and wait and wait and struggle. And he probably had family who were murmuring and were frustrated, and all of that. And that's a long time, 3.5 years. And we've only been doing quarantine for
oh gosh
for
a
couple
can you
months.
imagine that? Oh man. Well, the amazing thing about Elijah during that famine, and I had to narrow down the story. I love Elijah. He has so many amazing stories, but it was cool because even in the famine, ravens fed him, and he lived by this brook. Then the brook dries up, and God leads him to this lady, and
I love that story too.
Blesses her as well as him. And so these stories that continue to come out about Elijah are incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yet people still are so slow to believe. I mean, if you think you see all of this and you think that you would believe when you see these miracles, but without the faith, without the putting in the work, even the miracle is not going to convince you to believe. And I always thought that was interesting as well.
Yep.
Is how stubborn we are.
Yeah, we are pretty stubborn. Even Jesus said when he was telling a parable, he's like, even if somebody came back from the dead, they would not believe. So we do have pretty stubborn hearts, which is why the greatest miracle wasn't the fire from the sky licking up the entire sacrifice. The greatest miracle is that new birth when we actually have that relationship.
Yeah, very, very well said. Very, very good. All right. Well, my next story is from the New Testament. It's pretty simple, but I still love it. And there's lots of miracles that Jesus performed. And one of my favorites is a woman with an issue of blood and 12 years. So she had been sick a long time with this. And she decides, she sees Jesus, and she decides that if she can just touch the hem of his garment, that she will be healed. And so she does, and she says, it says, for she said within herself, if I may touch his garment, I shall be whole. But Jesus turned him about, and when he saw her, he said, daughter, be of good comfort, thy faith hath made thee whole. And the woman was made whole from that hour. And I've always just loved that story, that she kind of came up with this miracle by herself, and she had such faith after 12 years of dealing with this. I think I'm not sure what kind of disease the issue of blood is, but that she had it for 12 years.
Yeah.
And that's a long time. And to have, if we, of course, we now think, okay, Jesus, it's Jesus, but like he'd only been a name for a little bit at this point.
Yeah.
He was a new prophet, a new person. And so for her to have the faith that if she just touches clothing, that she would be healed. And that he talks about that, he felt virtue leave out of him, and that in the apostles were kind of upset because people were kind of mobbing him. People were, and he says, who touched me? And they're like, sir, like, Lord, there's lots of people here in this crowd. But he knew. And he had, I think that it's another kind of similar to the Second King story that with Elisha, that we have more that be with us than they that be with them, that there's that individuality to God and to faith that I love, and something I'm always drawn to. And that in this huge crowd of people, that Jesus could sense the one that had come to him for a miracle, and that had this happen, and he healed her. And I just always loved that story. I think it's so beautiful.
Oh yeah. Well, one of the most beautiful things about that story is just it is her faith. I mean, to deal with something like that issue of blood for 12 years. I mean, a lot of times when nowadays we deal with things that are chronic like that, sometimes rather than our faith getting stronger, it's like it breaks down, like it gets wearing to carry that stuff. And like you said, Jesus was a new prophet. It was a relatively new name at that time. But the fact that she heard of his reputation, heard who he was, and believed the way that she believed, it's incredible. And one of the things I studied is when she grabbed the hem of his garment, and then he turned around and said, your faith has made you whole, is that word whole. In some translations has that word sozo. And that word sozo is an all-encompassing salvation. And so it's the physical, it's the spiritual, it's also the mental. I mean, it's all encompassing. And so I thought that was really cool that her faith made her whole, or really almost that all encompassing salvation. Like her faith, like a magnet, drew that virtue out of him. And I thought that is really cool.
Yeah. And I've always loved the way that Jesus took time to show his love for the women in that's surrounding him, not just the men. It was a very patriarchal culture and religion at the time, and obviously all the apostles were men. All the leaders in the Hebrew church at the time would have all been men. And I think that it took sort of a second to pause and to acknowledge the women that were surrounding him as well as the men. And you see that with Mary Magdalene. You see that with his mother. You see that with Martha and Mary. You see that, just with a lot of different, the woman at the well, these women that he took the time to minister to and to befriend and teach. And I love that. And just his attention to the individual and making sure that they felt loved, and that it wasn't enough just for this miracle to happen, for her to touch his garment and for her to be healed. It was that he took the time to show that she had great faith and to reaffirm that, because the miracle isn't enough, like we talked about.
Yeah.
That won't convert people for long, but this moment between the two of them becomes a sacred moment. And you think about that in your own life, that he's got the whole world to take care of, but he still notices that moment when Chris or Rachel, touch his garment and need his love and help. And I really appreciate that about this story. It's very intimate in the midst of a huge crowd. Yeah. And I think that's great.
We'll also think about the fact that blood was unclean. And so here's a woman unclean touching the hem of his garment. So you got her faith and her courage. She stuck around and owned up to the fact that she touched his garment, which that would have been bad because she was bleeding, therefore unclean, and touching the hem of his robe. And then Jesus turned with such compassion, like you said. In this patriarchal society, he turned and showed compassion and paid attention to her. And this society that looked at, bleeding like that, unclean, and he turned and had this compassion on her and pronounced her clean and pronounced her righteous, pronounced her healed. It's like you look at that and you go, no wonder people left everything to just follow him.
Yeah. So what's your last story that you wanted to share?
Well, my last story is a very human story about this moment of great faith and then falling flat on your face. So I continue the story of Elijah. So literally probably the next day, after the fire comes down from heaven, and then it goes further, he prays for rain, and it rains. And so that is also an incredible story in of itself. So all of this has
after all this famine.
All this famine, fire down from heaven, and then supernaturally cloud buildup and rain. The supernatural, the great signs and wonders have happened. And Jezebel says, I'm going to kill you dead. And Elijah runs for his life, absolutely scared. It says this, and then he went alone into the wilderness, traveling all day, and he sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I have had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. So here's this guy who just saw fire from heaven, and Jezebel said, I'm going to kill you. So he gets scared and he runs for his life. And then can you imagine the shame of the fear that he felt? So not only was he scared and feared for his life, now he feels the shame, and his prayer is, Lord, just let me die. And yet God doesn't let him die. An angel even shows up to feed him twice, I think, and feeds him to prepare him for a journey across the desert to get to Mount Sinai. And the cool thing about it being Mount Sinai is the mountain where God revealed his presence to Moses and the children of Israel. And so God leads Elijah to Mount Sinai, but it's 40 days across the desert. And what I like about this part in the story is, so again, this is like him going 40 days through the desert fasting. And Jesus did that, 40 days in the desert fasting. Israel spent 40 years in the desert. Even David had his period of living in a cave. And so what I think this shows is this is a wilderness experience that we all as Christians, are people, as humans, we have these sad times. We have these wilderness experiences where we feel like we're all alone. And that's one of the things that Elijah is dealing with. He feels like there's nobody else that believes in God the way that he believes in God. And Jezebel's just threatened his life. So he feels like he's utterly alone in the world. those that are in the world are threatening his life, and now he's literally having this wilderness experience. And he gets to Mount Sinai, and God asks him, what are you doing here? And Elijah says, I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty, but the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets, and I'm the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too. And this is the part that's amazing, because God says, come out to the mountain, let me talk to you. And so when Elijah comes out to the mountain, there's like this mighty fire, but God wasn't in the fire. There's this mighty wind, but God wasn't in the wind. There's this mighty earthquake, but God wasn't in the earthquake. And I love that, because it's like, I think even today, when we want to hear from God, we're looking for a grandiose sign. And I know I've been there. I know there's been times I've looked for a sign, that I've gone to church expecting some sort of sign for God to speak to me. And so we keep looking for some kind of grand moment where God speaks. But God wasn't in that big stuff. In fact, God was in the whisper. And what I like about the fact that it was a whisper that God was in, is a whisper is something that is more intimate. A whisper requires you to humble yourself. It requires you to lean in a little closer so that you can hear it, which is exactly what God wants, which goes back to the meaning of that first story with the fire from heaven. What's the real miracle? It's that close relationship with God. Again, when God speaks to Elijah in the whisper, he says, what are you doing here? I mean, God knows what he's doing here. It's a rhetorical question to get Elijah to answer it. And Elijah does the same answer that he did before, because I'm the only one left. And oh God, they're trying to kill me. And God comforts him. God says, go and anoint this new king of the northern kingdom. Go anoint this new king of the southern kingdom. Go find Elisha and anoint him to replace you as prophet. Oh, and by the way, you're not alone. There are 7,000, a remnant, that have not bowed their knee to Baal. You are not alone. So in that whisper, as Elijah listened to it, God gave him direction for what to do next with his life. And God reminded him that he's not alone in his trials and in his struggles. And so he goes through that wilderness experience to not an amazing grand miracle where God spoke to him in a miraculous way, but God spoke to him in the gentle whisper. And that's what I love about that story. It is that reminder we're not alone, that God will give us direction, but we got to stop looking for the sign. As Jesus once said, it is a wicked and perverse generation who seeks a sign. Quit seeking the sign. Yeah. Humble yourself and listen to that still small voice, because God is speaking to us in that whisper.
Yeah, isn't it interesting that all four stories, and we didn't plan this really.
No.
We discussed once we made our decisions, but we did not do this as some kind of theme, but that all four stories are all about the intimate relationship that you can have with God, and how there is power in what you don't see, in the small things, in the hidden things, in the moments of trust and faith that we can have with him. And it can feel almost overwhelming sometimes, the evils that are out there, the struggles that are out there. And we can look at all four of these stories and remember that God is there, and that he loves us, and that he is advocating for us, and that there's people with us that are helping us, all that stuff. I mean, I was feeling so sad this week about the whole Lori Vallow thing. I don't know if you followed that at all. It's very sad. And they had a very sad development this week. And I just think, who could be so evil that they could kill two innocent, these two children? It just made me sick. It made me so sad. And I was just feeling very, very sad. And it's moments like that he's there for us, that he understands, that he loves us, and that we need to remember that there is power in the whispers. There's power in the things unseen, that they that be without they that be with us are more than they that be with them, that there's power in the simple touch of a garment. There's that, all of these stories. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. And I think that's a good reminder. I mean, myself, I think I'm just coming out of a wilderness experience myself. And I'm not just talking about COVID-19. I mean, yeah. I just feel like over the last several years, I've been through the wilderness. And I hope I'm coming out of it on the other end, because things keep speaking to me and reminding me of what we're just talking about. It's not about looking for these grand moments and these huge signs. It's this simple thing. It's learning to listen to his voice and walking out that close relationship, that close friendship with God day by day. And just as what I love about this story of Elijah and what I love about, the woman who grabbed the hem of Jesus's garment, it's about imperfect people.
Yeah.
Elijah had a moment of tremendous faith, and then he fell in complete fear. And God didn't hold that fear against him. God wasn't rubbing that in his face. God gently spoke to him and gave him direction during like one of the toughest times of his life. And so I just think it's that great reminder that we might feel unworthy. We might be afraid that God has a lightning bolt with our name on it because of something that we've done. But grab the hem of his garment.
Yeah.
Lean in and listen to that whisper. There is no lightning bolt with your name on it. In fact, I think it might be in Isaiah, but it's where he says, I have carved your name on the palms of my hands. And when you look at the scars on Jesus's hands, be reminded that that's your name, that he loves you, and that was for you. And so lean in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. Very, very good. This definitely been very, it's definitely been very inspiring, and it's a good reminder that he loves us and that everything's going to be okay, even when you see great evil, that it will not defeat the good. And so it's a great reminder, and we'd love to hear your thoughts about these 4 stories. Are they 4 favorites of yours? What's something that maybe some insight that you might have about them, that we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section or on Twitter. And thanks so much. This was really edifying, and I'm grateful to be able to have read these scriptures this week and be able to try to have some counterbalance in my daily life to just these sad things that I feel like it was a very sad week. And so I'm grateful for this. And so thank you very much. And where can people find you on your channel?
You can find me here on YouTube. My channel is called Durbania. So just search Durbania. I do movie reviews. I rank movies. I do trailer reactions. But one of my favorite things is the theological analysis or the theological review. I just did one on Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and about how untamable the power of God is. I love to dig into movies and find God in movies. Indiana Jones was a lot of fun to do. So come on over, check it out.
Yes, definitely you guys should. And let us know what you think, if you like this idea or if you prefer maybe what we were doing before, whatever. We'd love your feedback. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews all over social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So check that out. Also all over at the Hallmarkies podcast. And we also have our Patreon group, which we had our second live movie watch with. We had the director and writer of the Hallmark film All for Love, and that was really fun yesterday. So check that out, and also have our merch store. And so we really appreciate this, and thanks again, and we'll talk next week. Bye everyone.